2014 represents what is going to be a fairly important qualitative change in the way we look at equity markets, both globally and here in the Asia-Pac region. And the qualitative change that I'm talking about here is that we think essentially that room for what we would call risk compression, in other words, stocks rising as big macro risks decline, is basically done. And the reason I say this is because that we think a lot of the key drivers that underpinned the global financial crisis and which was so critical to the equity market's performance over the past 2 years as those risks came down, nominal U.S. GDP to grow at about 4.5% by the end of the year ahead, by basically this time next year. We're looking at 4.5% nominal. Now, as you report that number, or if you report that number, please understand that's nominal GDP, not real GDP. We're looking for U.S. real GDP to be about 3%, 3.0, with inflation at about 1.5, and that gets you to nominal GDP of 4.5. But what you can clearly see is that based on the relationship between Treasury yields and nominal GDP, that yields should be biased to the upside in the year ahead. On the 10-year Treasury yield by the end of 2014, that's about 45 basis points above where we are today, which means that we do believe that equities have to basically be positioned for an increase in Treasury yields, and with that, a strengthening of the U.S. dollar. And stronger Treasury yields and a stronger U.S. dollar are pretty important underpinnings of our view on the equity space overall. And the other region where we have an overweight, it's in emerging Asia in particular. Now, emerging markets overall we have some concerns about, but in Asia-Pac in particular, we see a very strong leverage to the pickup in the global developed markets. So Nomura, to be clear, believes that there is a global growth recovery coming in 2014, but that recovery is going to be largely led by the developed markets and not by the emerging markets. And this is a change compared to the pre-global financial crisis era, where it was really the emerging markets that was leading growth, not the developed markets. So why do we like emerging Asia then? We like it because emerging Asia provides strong support through its export sector for local earnings through and as a result of their trade links to the developed markets. So Asia is attractive because it's still a very export-intensive region. Is that a steeper Treasury curve as we go into 2014 is going to be a particularly brisk headwind for the property sector, generally speaking, around Asia. And that certainly applies with specificity to Hong Kong, given the fact that Hong Kong as an equity market is more intense in terms of property sector exposure than any other market in the region. Hong Kong is more than 30% property stocks as a percentage of market capitalization, and then a big chunk of the remainder in Hong Kong is local banks that have a substantial amount of property exposure through either mortgage lending, lending to property developers, or lending to businesses that is often collateralized by property. So first, the figure 98, that relationship between the Treasury yield curve and property, keeps us a bit more cautious on property as a sector. But then it also, because of the intensity of property in the Hong Kong market, keeps us a bit more cautious on Hong Kong as a market. And in fact, we do have an underweight recommendation on the Hong Kong market, which is our only underweight in North Asia. As I mentioned a moment ago, we have overweights in both Korea and Taiwan.